What's up, peeps? I'm answering an open tag to Rochambeau. Um, if you're not familiar with Rochambeau's channel, I'll put a link to it in the description, so you can go check him out. Subscribe to him. Rochambeau does much higher quality videos than I do. He's got a great outlook on knives. He was kind enough to tag me in this open tag about sentimental knives. Um, Guys, this is not a knife show video for me, and I want to explain to you why. The most sentimental knife in my life I do not own. I no longer own. I'll put it that way. Without going into my complete history, throughout my childhood, I grew up very poor. Um, I grew up with a very loving mother and a monster of a father. Not going to get too deep into that, but to say that I had some hurdles in life to overcome would be a slight understatement. But I had some people in my life who affected me and helped me become at least a decent human being, I feel like. And one of those people was a gentleman by the name of Gary Gladden. Gary lived uh, probably a half mile or so from me. And he had a son that was my age. I think he was a year younger than me. And I was in such a rural area that his son John was literally the only kid I had access to. So, needless to say, me and John spent a lot of our days together. We've probably killed more Indians and Nazis out in those pastures than we could count. Had a very good childhood growing up, running around in the woods and the pastures on Gary Gladden's property. The reason why I'm telling you about Gary is because my most sentimental knife, the knife that I will never forget, pertains to Gary. Um, Give you a little bit of history on why I thought so highly of this man. As a young child, I remember Gary was this large and very imposing figure. He always had on Liberty overalls. He had a big full beard back before they were popular. Um, I just remember things around his house and around his property. He owned tractors, he owned guns, he owned, um, you know, I remember a compound bow hanging in his garage, and he had a the old reloading system for shotgun shells. Gary Gladden was the epitome of a man in my eyes, much more so than well, for lack of a better term, much more so than the monster that I lived with. But and Gary taught me. Well, I don't even know if he meant to, but Gary taught me the meanings of being a man and just being an American and being everything that I would wind up striving to be. But to get to the knife part of this, I'll never forget one day I was inside Gary's house and Gary wasn't at home. John and I had been playing. We rarely ever went inside the house. His mother was a very sweet woman, but like many women of her time, she was very particular about her house. And the last thing she wanted was a couple of dirty little boys running around in it. So we didn't go in there much. But this particular day we were. And I remember this large, I don't even know what to consider it. It wasn't a chest of drawers, but it was this large cabinet in the hallway. Um, and I don't know where John was, but I was there by myself. I was probably, I'm going to guess, 8 years old. And when I opened this drawer, it was full of some of the most amazing things I'd ever seen. There were all these pocket knives and 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 old Zippo lighters. And I don't remember Gary smoking, but um, it was just full of all. It was just treasures to me. And I remember the one that stuck out the most to me was this Kissing Crane stiletto. I remember picking it up and looking at it and just being amazed at this thing. It had this large pointy blade on it and brass bolsters, the stiletto style bolsters with the little opposing guards made out of brass and a, a bone handle. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I think it was the first time I remember in my life struggling with right and wrong. Um, and I lost that struggle. I put that pocket knife in my pocket, I hid it, and I took it home. Um, by the end of that day, I have no idea how often Gary went into this cabinet, but by the end of that day, he knew that the knife was gone. He also knew that he had raised his son well enough to know that his son didn't take it. There could only be one person, and that had to be me. So he called and asked me if I took his knife, and luckily in that moment, um, my morals were good enough to not try to lie my way out of it. I admitted that I took it. I did make up some horrible story about how I was just going to borrow it and I was going to bring it back. But the moral of the story is I stole the man's knife. Don't know what this knife meant to him. I have no idea. Don't know what the knife cost. It doesn't matter. But I stole the knife because, like I said, I grew up very poor. Didn't have many things. Um, I remember that being one of the first objects I ever laid eyes on that I just had to have. So I took it. Anyway, Gary told me to bring his knife back, and I told him I would the next day because it was already after dark, so I couldn't walk back down there. And when my dad got home, he beat me within inches of my life because I'm assuming Gary called him and told him what I'd done. And um, anyway, so he beat me uh, much worse than I deserved, I'm sure. But as an 8-year-old child learning life lessons, I did deserve something. But anyway, so I get up the next morning and put the knife in my pocket and I take off down to Gary's. And this half mile walk as an 8-year-old seemed like 5 miles, but I just remember that walk of shame and that feeling in my stomach. Not that it wasn't just that I'd done something wrong, it was that he was the only adult male in my life who I actually had respect for. And that feeling of how badly I had let him down was just overwhelming. I got to the house, I handed him his knife, fully expecting, him to react the same way that my dad did, with hate and violence and anger. But instead, Gary set me down and he told me about the knife. It was a kissing crane stiletto. It was made in Germany. Um, it's been too long ago for me to remember all the details, but um, just with very stern and kind hands, he explained the knife to me and how it was made, what it was made of. And I think it was my first experience with a sentimental knife, something that meant something to me, even though I only owned it for less than 12 hours and I'd stolen it. But the life lesson that came with that and the example that he set as far as being a good man and being a good father stuck with me for the rest of my life. Now, fast forward probably close to 30 years. I had my own mechanic shop and I had a customer there, older gentleman who had probably a $500,000 RV that had a mural of Jesus painted on the side of it. I'm not going to mention his name, but just one of the best men I've ever met. He had a son that was also a customer of mine that was an absolute hellion. It always confused me how such a great man raised such a horrible kid. But anyway, I had a lot of respect for this man, and like I said, he was elderly when I met him, and he had passed on, um, died at a very old age. And his son, whom I never had a whole lot of respect for, just because it broke my heart to see how much heartache he caused his dad, showed up at my shop one day to inform me that he had something that his dad wanted me to have. And It was a kissing crane stiletto. It was that exact same knife. Now, this gentleman did not know Mr. Gladden. I don't know that they ever met. I don't know if they knew each other's names. I just remember how deeply emotional it was that one of the probably top 5 human beings I'd ever met in my life. One of them I stole that knife from. And while I didn't get to keep the knife, I got a very valuable life lesson. And the other ended up giving me that knife. Now, I don't know what happened to it. I wish I did. I wish I could get it back. I don't know. I don't know if somebody stole it from me or if I just lost it. I kept it in my toolbox for years and it just got gone. But yeah, I've got plenty of knives here I could show that have a lot of sentimental value. None from my childhood, none really from my family, but most of them are just from very kind people in the knife community who have gifted me things that I would probably never own had they not gifted them to me. And it would be unfair for me to try to show any of them um, without making one seem more important than the other. So yeah, that's my most sentimental knife, the kissing crane stiletto that I stole as a child from one of the greatest men I ever knew, and that I was gifted by one of the greatest men I ever knew. So yeah, thanks for tagging me, Rochambeau. If you've made it this far into the video, I would like to tag. Um, I'd like to tag Apex Alchemy, and I would like to tag um, the Last Ranger. So, if you guys could do me the favor of making a short video on your most sentimental knife, it'd mean the world to me. You guys know I appreciate the amount of time y'all spend with me. Peace. Love y'all.